Okay, so thank you for joining today, our webinar, How a Remote Workforce Affects IBMI Security, brought to you by Help Systems. And really our goal here is to help companies build better IT. And big part of that is security. And it's something that I'm actually rather passionate about. My name is Sandy Moore. I'm Principal Security Consultant here at Help Systems, and I've been working on IBMI for almost 20 years now. It's crazy to even say that, but it's really been something that I've been found really a lot of excitement about, and security itself is where I start to geek out, and I really enjoy having conversations with customers to figure out where they sit with security on their systems and determine some actions that need to be taken and to help them get those tools implemented on their system. So really hopefully be able to share some good information with you guys today on some security issues that we see coming up. And we'll just kind of go through a couple different areas and talk about them. I do have a couple of polls that I'll shoot out there to you as well. So again, feel free to use the questions panel if you do have questions as we go through the presentation today. All right, we're going to jump right in and talk about changes to the threat landscape. So, there's no denying that there are threats out there, that there are threat actors, bad guys who are trying to cause problems, whether it's for financial gain, if it's for revenge, if it's for political purposes. And those threats are typically initiated two ways. They're outsiders, so it's the criminal element, competitors, as well as that political gain. Who you do business with can drive who is willing to or wants to attack your business. Threats can also come from the inside, of course. So a negligent user, where that threat may not be intentional, but through that user's negligence, it causes a security breach. Malicious, a vindictive employee or soon to be former employee doing something malicious. But then also the accidental. And accidental threats are just as damaging. It's just the intention may not have been there. So the threats themselves and what are driving them hasn't changed all that much. But over the course of the last 15 months, we've actually seen that the threats are initiated from a new place. And work from home employees or remote employees have added a whole nother layer and unfortunately a conduit between the outside and the inside threats. Because those employees are working remotely, and we saw a huge increase in remote employees due to the global pandemic and companies having their employees work from home. What we're seeing is that a lot of companies have employees that are going to stay working remotely. And so that number, I think, is going to stay much higher. And the scramble for companies to make sure that they have everything in place to mitigate those threats from those remote employees has been a huge challenge. And really, we need to look at why these remote employees are a threat and the things that we can do to help specifically address the threat to the IBMI. Because that's really where I'm at, is talking about the IBMI in general and the security of that platform. The entire network is critical. But for many companies, the core business applications are running on IBMI. So making sure that we are thinking about where those threats are coming from and really what they mean for you. Those remote employees, of course, are going to be adding threats in a variety of ways. Laptops. So you send somebody home with a laptop and you assume that they're going to stay up to date on any new patches, any new security fixes, any updates to the antivirus or anti-malware protection on that PC. Some people don't have laptops to send home with the employees working from home, so they're working from non-company owned computers. So you lose the standards of setup that would have been in place if they were working in the office on the company owned hardware. There's been a huge increase in phishing and scam emails, taking advantage of the fear around what happened with the pandemic, but also taking advantage of the environment of remote employees. And those phishing and scam emails, users who are sitting or working at home, they're distracted by life. They've got kids at home that they normally wouldn't have. They've got the spouse at home or the elderly parents. So there's all of these external distractions that you wouldn't have at the office. And so your mindset changes and you no longer have that immediate focus on work and that this is someone who works with us and that someone is asking me a question. And so the injection of a phishing email into a stream of communications can go unnoticed. So it has made us all very distracted, exponentially increasing the risk of somebody falling for one of those phishing or scam emails. Web browsing. So whether you're looking for information on any different topic, browsing the internet can be dangerous. And if you're not staying up to date on your updates on your hardware, your laptop, or your PC that you're using, there is that potential. A lot of different things you can do with that web browsing. Internet download. So who's downloading information to their laptop? Are they downloading an application? Are they downloading something that would not be appropriate and they would never do in the office, but then maybe they do it, are willing to actually take that step from home? VPN connections. So most of your users hopefully are using a VPN connection to connect into your systems and into the network. But once those VPN connections are made, everything that user was doing outside of work hours before they connected the VPN can impact your network. Inside the firewall can be impacted by what somebody was doing after hours outside of the network. So those VPN connections have essentially brought everything that happens outside of work into work. And so the work from home risk there, again, has multiplied exponentially. Media, thumb drives, cell phones, MP3 players, all those things that are connecting as well. The IoT, the smart home devices. I sat here before we got started today and I started thinking about what smart devices do I have in my home, and do these manufacturers of these appliances that manage the hardware or the software that drives this, are they thinking about security? They're really not. They're the idea on my smart refrigerator and my smart range is not about security. It's about me being able to remotely start my oven so that I can get dinner on in time, or my smart refrigerator that allows me to put pictures on the display screen of my family. They're not thinking about the security perspective and can someone get in to that device and then end up getting into my home Wi-Fi network and then getting to my work PC that I'm connecting to the office with from home. So all of those things can start impacting and introduce ways that a trusted user who is inside your environment is actually going to be able to be impacted. So a lot of different things that we don't think about. And think about the Wi-Fi at someone's home. Have they changed the default password on that router? Have they updated the security on it? Is there a password even on the Wi-Fi at home? So all of those things do impact the business, even though it's someone who's not even in the building. All right, so kind of set the stage there for you guys. I want to launch a poll here and find out what you guys think here. And if you guys actually have employees who are working remotely. And so really want to kind of get an idea if you've got fully remote employees, you've got a hybrid. Maybe you've got some users who are back in the office and some people are not. Or maybe no remote employees at all. And some businesses, it just doesn't work to have a remote employees. And it really depends. So there's a lot of different ways that this is going to happen. I've even heard of employees rotating who's in the office and who's not, just to keep the number of individuals out of the office down to a minimum. So, and it's going to be regional and depends on where your offices are located, and you may have offices in different states and different countries that have different requirements. So, all right, so looks like we have a lot of both. So that hybrid, and then you've got employees who are both fully remote, some of them who are in partial. Very few customers here that have actually don't have anybody working remotely. So I'm going to go ahead and close that poll there and share the results. So it looks like 21% of you have fully remote, 21% are hybrid as well. And then half of you attending today that answered the poll have both. So definitely this is something that's not gonna go away. So you understand where you're at here and that this is in fact something that is gonna be addressed. I guess that's why you joined me today, was because this is something that is in fact a problem for you. All right, so talking about the threats themselves, they can impact their availability of hardware and business applications. So a security incident can cripple the organization, completely take you offline. Think about if your IBMI was unplugged from the network, what is your business going to be able to do? Are you going to be able to continue doing business? Is inventory affected? Is order entry affected? Invoicing, payroll, general ledger? All of those things can actually impact the business. So it's not just, oh, this is a file that maybe we don't want to be impacted. It can be the entire business that can actually be taken offline by a security incident. So we have to think a little bit bigger than just, oh, this is a threat, somebody's breached our system. What's going to happen if it does happen? So one of the things that we talk about is malware. I talk about malware a lot. I actually interchange malware with virus. They are essentially, malware is a malicious computer software that interferes with the normal function of the computer. And it may send personal data about the user to unauthorized parties. So track your credentials and send them off to somebody who will later take advantage of it. And so any software that's designed to operate in a malicious way. So that's what how I define malware. This is how it's also defined if you look at Merriam-Webster dictionary online as well. So, but like I said, I interchange it with viruses. A virus is another way of stating malware. And regardless of what its goal is, if it's malicious, that's what we're concerned about. Now, of course, we're talking to an IBMI audience, so we always wonder about whether or not a power server can actually contract a virus. And it is something that there are some folks online who like to say, no, there's no way, it's impossible. And there's others that have proven that, in fact, it can be impacted. And so it is, in fact, the truth. It can, in fact, be contract a virus, it can host a virus, it can be impacted by a virus. So I like to share this screenshot. This is actually from a customer that I worked with personally. And just to kind of give you a little background on what happened here, this is actually a log from a virus scan that the customer did on their IBMI that shows they had 248,000 viruses on their PC, or sorry, on their IBMI in their IFS. And this came about through a shared directory, a share over the root directory, and an all object user, and a PC with ransomware running on it. And 72 hours later, 500,000 files encrypted on that IBMI and that IFS. System completely unavailable. TCP/IP configuration files encrypted by that ransomware, and users could not connect from anywhere but the console. And they had batch jobs failing. Their website was down because it ran out of the IFS as well. And huge recovery process, huge downtime, huge impact to the business. When you spend 2 weeks trying to bring your core server back up, that can cause some significant issues. So this is not the only one that I've dealt with. I have talked with many customers. I actually, last week, I had 3 different companies that I worked with that were dealing with a full-blown ransomware incident. And it's unfortunately not going away. This is going to continue. It's not if you're going to be attacked, it's a matter of when you're going to be attacked. So we really need to start thinking about what is the impact, what is going to be affected, and what will happen to our business. Some businesses don't actually survive ransomware attacks. This was a year and a half ago, just over a year and a half ago, business that was attacked by ransomware, and they ended up closing their doors right before Christmas. So it can be catastrophic to a business. If you're on the edge and your system is no longer available, you can't do business, sometimes the decision is a really difficult one. So what we don't want is for the core server to be susceptible and to be open to this attack. You might be thinking about, how did I miss this? Why didn't I know that this was a problem? Why didn't I know this was a threat? The native objects on IBMI are considered immune from viruses. In order to change a program on the native side, those native programs, you have to recompile that program. So it's a little bit harder for this to happen. But the integrated file system is not immune to that malware. Once IBM added the ability for those stream files to be stored in the IFS and for PCs to actually access those files, it created the environment where the integrated file system can be infected, can host infections. So what you need to be doing is making sure that you are scanning that integrated file system and you are immunizing it against those threats so that it's not a host, so that it doesn't act as that typhoid Mary to infect your network, to pass along to other servers, to other customers, to vendors, to business partners. So making sure that it's not part of the equation. Now, I've had people tell me I don't use the IFS, or it's only the IFS, that it doesn't matter. We don't use it. You can't not use the IFS. The integrated file system actually includes your native libraries and objects. If you look at the root directory, do a work link / root directory, qsys.lib is a directory under the root. That is your native file structure. It can't be infected, it can't be encrypted, but it can be damaged. So it's not just the IFS that we're concerned about here. It's your entire IBMI system. Those native structures can be renamed or deleted by malicious actors or code. So if your user has the authority to get to that qsys.lib, that native structure through the IFS, anyone malicious threat actor who has their credentials and is masquerading as that user can do a lot of harm to the system. Your other IFS structures can be renamed, deleted, encrypted, and infected. So the integrated file system is a critical component, and it can, in fact, be a catalyst and the entry point for a huge attack that is potentially going to bring down the entire system. When we talk about how viruses can spread to the IBMI, map drives is the first thing we talk about. The ability for a user to connect to the IBMI through the IFS from their PC by mapping a drive to a shared directory is probably foremost the highest risk way that this is going to happen. Those map drives, once that directory is available, regardless of how the user's using it, whether they're going through File Explorer or they're using FTP, they're doing a save as from any Windows application, they're going to be able to get directly to it. Or if they're just in a command prompt, you can actually very easily copy a file without actually having that map drive pulled up. A shell script can easily copy a file up to any directory that is in fact mapped and available to that user. So whatever authority that user has, guess what? That compromised PC, whatever malware is on that PC has that same authority. FTP is another easy way. So, spreading malware to a piece to the IBMI through FTP, whether you're using an application like FileZilla, or if you're just using, again, going back to the command prompt, FTP and access to, command prompt and access to Google, you can very easily move files up to a server, whether it's malware or not. And you got to make sure that you know who's moving those objects up to the system. So the ability for someone to upload files to the server that could be malicious is a huge risk, and spreading to the IBMI that way is definitely a concern. Of course, there's other ways. It's not just the map drives and the FTP. Any install media, if you've got downloading applications from vendors and running an install, everyone's assuming that everybody else is doing the scanning and that they're ensuring that what they're giving you is not infected by malware. But that's actually a pretty common attack vector. Think about SolarWinds, and they had a compromised update and it went out to their customers and it was from a trusted source. So we have to be considering install media, any image catalogs, NFS mounts, UDFS mounts, business partners. Do you have people signing on to your servers that are not your employees? Do they have the same requirements for their security standards on their PCs and their IBMI as you do? So there is absolutely exposures to the system, because you can't get anything onto the system without having a connection. So that connection being active and live does open up the ability for malware to spread to the IBMI. IBMI is also quite happy to spread viruses as well. So you get that malware on the IBMI, it's perfectly happy to share it with anybody who accesses it. So all the same ways that your users were able to spread that malware to the IBMI through those map drives, FTP, and so forth, it is perfectly happy to do that. It can also spread through high availability. Backup media. If you save your system and you've got malware on it, and then you restore it to your DR system, you just restored that malware over to your DR system as well. Web servers. I actually just had an incident with a customer who had web server running on their IBMI, and they scanned their system for viruses, and they found an old Trojan horse program that had been sitting on their web server for, I think it was almost 9 years. And that file had been sitting there, and because they never scanned, it was never neutralized, it was never stopped, it was never taken care of. And so it sat there on their web server, and what it was doing is it was redirecting ad traffic. So while it wasn't spreading and taking malicious content and deleting or modifying files, it was redirecting things. It was doing something that they didn't know about, and had been able to do that for quite some time. Now, if this had been it had been running a Windows web server, it would have been identified quite some time ago, because everybody's scanning their Windows servers. So not scanning your IBMI server, you can very happily be hosting up on your web server on IBMI malware. So there's a lot of other ways that this can happen as well. So when viruses are affecting IBMI, really what can happen is there's a variety of ways that this is going to affect the system. So whether it's hosting or spreading, the impact to IBMI can also be actually catastrophic. If there's a shell script or a malware running on a PC, and it is that PC is connected to the IBMI, it could easily delete anything that user has access to. So that's obvious. Delete the delete command here. If you're deleting and it's deleting from the directory the user has access to, those network drives, it could very easily delete the entire operating system. Now, there is another company who works in the hardware side of things, and recently one of their employees, who I've worked with personally a few years ago, he actually took it upon himself to prove that you could destroy an IBMI from a PC with a simple delete command. And it took a few hours before the system was rendered unavailable, and then finally the system was completely destroyed. So it can happen, it does happen, and so what we need to be doing is making sure that we're aware of how it can affect the system, and making sure that we're putting in controls that minimize the potential for this to happen. So malicious programs can also do things on the system that might modify things. So this is just a simple sending a SQL statement through the ODBC server And whether it's sending a message to a message queue, or if it's sending a command to start FTP or to call a program that is doing something malicious on the system, that can affect the system as well. Starting a service, disabling a service, all of those things can still affect the system's availability and functioning. Any shared files that the user has authority to modify or delete could very easily be impacted as well. So that effect could make things unavailable. It could cause errors. So whether the file is it's an original state or not, it could create issues. So if you have, QIBM file that's modified in QIBM directory for client access, and I do know a lot of customers are still using client access as opposed to ACS. So that can, in fact, introduce and create issues in your environment as well. All right, so their effect on the system itself, of course, can be pretty profound. But let's talk about what actually is at risk. So what could be impacted? So your operating system. I mentioned already qsys.lib. So you can see here I've got IBM Navigator for I, and I have qsys.lib, and unfortunately it was created as a share on one of my systems. So my operating system is at risk through that share. If you go through, like I said, do a work link, qsys.lib, it's right there. The operating system is part of the IFS. So that operating system, once that directory is shared, that root directory is shared, and there is a network drive that is mapped over it, very quickly from that PC with a DOS command window, I can do a directory of any Q directories under my root directory, and qsys.lib comes right on up. So the operating system is at risk. So there's absolutely the concern about the system itself being compromised. Your TCP/IP configuration files. So if you look at the under the qsys.lib again, you'll see that the TCP/IP configuration files are listed there as well. So if you have that shared and it is available to a user outside of the system through any share, any network drive, those TCP/IP configuration files are at risk as well. Communications to the system can be significantly impacted. High availability, unfortunately, is also impacted. So the high availability system is perfectly happy with replicating malware from the production system to the backup system. So if you have an object that's deleted by a virus or by a threat actor or hacker, that object is automatically deleted by the HA on the HA system as well, right? Your HA system is going to go, okay, I'll get rid of it. Or if an object is renamed, if it's ransomware and it's renamed and held for ransom, guess what? That change is also going to be replicated. Or if someone has placed malware on the system intentionally, it's a new object in the IFS. HA software says, okay, I'll put it on your backup system as well. So high availability can actually create a bigger problem, and we really need to rethink the recovery process. High availability is not a good recovery plan for a malware attack. What you're going to have to do is develop some new plans on that, and I will throw out some suggestions as well. All right, so obviously there's, some issues in hand. There's some significant things at risk here. So what we really need to do is start thinking about layers of malware protection. Server configuration itself is critical. You have to have it configured properly. Software is also a very important piece of the equation here. So what we really like to find is that there's a hybrid approach. We want to make sure that there's a balance, making sure that the server configurations are done properly, because you have to minimize that. If you're going to open up the back door and say, well, it's Not my fault that the system got attacked. I put a ton of software in place, but I opened up the back door. You're not helping yourself. So you have to have that server configuration done properly, and then use that software to add more compensating controls and more layers of protection. So finding that sweet spot. If you have someone tell you, hey, put this software on the system and you're golden, you have no problems, we'll fix everything, you need to run the other way, because this is not going to be the solution. It has to be a combination of things. Good configurations. So let's talk about first the cleanup and operating system controls. Use what IBM gave you. Okay, there are some things that you can do and should be doing to minimize the exposures and the damage. So eliminate read-write shares to the root directory. If you have a question, say, well, I don't know who's using it, that's probably the best reason to get rid of that share. If you don't know who's using that root share, that's a problem, right? Who's using it and why would they be using it? Read-only shares whenever possible. Make sure that you're don't have read-write shares out there. A read-write share is going to become the victim of an attack. Set the public authority on the root to data authority RX, object authority *none. Set the public authority of the directories containing confidential or PII data to data authority exclude, object authority *none, and only authorize specific profiles with a business need. A lot of people forget about the files in the IFS, where they may have taken data from those native database files and they've created a document with some sensitive information, and it's now stored in the IFS. The IFS very often is hosting and serving up confidential information, and we forget about that piece of it. We have a tendency to protect the databases themselves, that native side of things, but we kind of let things kind of dangle in the wind there. So making sure that you're paying attention to that. What is in your IFS? Reduce the number of users with all object special authority. I can't emphasize this enough. All object authority, access to every object on the system, is catastrophic when it comes to a malware attack, because that profile, there's going to be widespread damage, widespread compromise. You also want to consider hiding shares. Any share name should have an S at the end of it so that it's not discoverable. So the only users who are going to be able to use the share that you've determined is appropriate are the ones that you've specifically given them to. They are not discoverable on the network. A big piece of that. Even if your users aren't mapping drives, if that share is discoverable, it can be compromised. Network sniffer programs look for that stuff. So big piece of that. Restrict access to qsys.lib file system. So we talked a lot about that native file structure, that qsys.lib, and that combination with the all object users, that's a problem. But other users, if you've shared the root directory and it's shared as a read-write share, qsys.lib is vulnerable. So there is an authorization list, the QPWF server authorization list, that you want to actually set to public exclude, and then just grant specific users authority if needed. Really not a lot of good justification for that. So I want you to be very careful with what shares you do create, and would there really be a good reason for someone to actually be able to access qsys.lib through a share. So a couple of solutions there is our Help System Security Services team can help with this cleanup and remediation. So the security remediation services, they can actually go through and help you figure out what shares do you have? What are the authorities to those shares? Who's using those shares? There's an extra piece to that one. So that'll definitely have to come back to another conversation we'll have in a minute. But really being able to actually start locking this down and using common sense for making sure that the system's not wide open through those shares. All right, so another piece of this, another part of that layer, the software layer, native virus scanning. So mitigating that malware on IBMI entails scanning the system natively. So being able to scan your files automatically through on-access scanning. So as a user opens a file through a map drive, make sure you're not spreading malware to that PC. So if it is hosting malware, you need to see it before it actually gets further on to another user. You can also scan through a close. So if a file on the IFS is saved with an update and there has been malicious code injected into it, we're going to see that. So if somebody's PC is trying to corrupt the files and inject malware into that file, we're going to see that. So making sure you're actually scanning those files, and then regularly scanning all of the files in your IFS through an on-demand batch scan. So we talked a lot about how the files are populated onto the system. Map drives, biggest risk, but FTP, third-party software, vendors, NFS mounts, all of those ways, those files are being populated in the IFS. So we need to make sure that you're scanning all of those files for threats, that somebody hasn't FTP'd something up to the system, hoping that it'll get served up and shared with everybody else in your network. So making sure you're doing that. You want to make sure that you review and delete infected files from the quarantine directory promptly. So don't leave those out there. Once you've done your investigation and you know what user has that infected file that was found on the system, deal with the user, do some re-education, make sure they understand what to open, what not to open, and what to watch for, and then clean it up. Make sure you're keeping your virus definitions up to date. So virus scanning, scanning for malware is only as good as the information it has. So keeping that up to date so that you know that in fact you are using current information. There's a lot of audit, government, and SOX regulation requirements that actually demand virus scanning on any server that has typed the regulated type of information on it. So by adding that native virus scanning, you're also going to meet those regulatory requirements. I want you to consider that a commercially backed antivirus solution is going to be your best protection. Open source software, not so great, because it's not intended for that enterprise environment where you actually have an entire company depending on the availability of these servers that you're scanning. So our PowerTech antivirus provides that native virus protection for IBMI. It's powered by McAfee. Really, this came about through a request from IBM. IBM approached one of our companies and said, hey, we have an integrated file system here. We've realized that, you know what, unfortunately, we're really good at hosting malware and we don't have a good way to take care of this. So they actually added controls, exit points, system values, and attributes to your stream file so that you can actually do that native virus scanning, okay? So why shouldn't you use Windows antivirus? Let me tell you the ways, the reasons why you do not want to do this. Scanning from map drive does have a lot of pitfalls. It actually creates more problems that it's going to solve. You do have to do a read-write share to the root directory. In order for you to actually be able to delete a stream file that is infected from a PC, you have to be able to write or delete. So now you've actually undone first recommendation I had, which was to remove the read-write shares over root, okay? So you've opened it up for more problems. You have to have a persistent network connection from that PC. So if there's an IPL or backup or restricted state, that PC is going to lose its connection. And you're also using you're going to have to use an all object profile to run that scan. It's not real time, it's not live scanning, it's not going to see as users use those files. So think about it this way. Every layer you can add to protect yourself is better. Every layer you have in place has to be notified or know about the threat. If one layer doesn't know about a threat, it can get through. A window of opportunity for that threat to get into your environment past the layer you're expecting to catch it onto the server. So, you know, it's also not very efficient from a PC. It doesn't keep track of the scan attributes on your stream files. It's going to scan everything every time. So there's no optimizing those scanning. Monitoring the scans for error messages, network. You've now taken all of those stream files and you're moving them across the network to the PC to scan them. So whether it's network bandwidth consumption or the fact that you're taking those stream files in clear text across your network, that would be, again, a problem. So you've exposed data that is unnecessarily exposed, and there's no OS acknowledgement of the infection. So the operating system doesn't know that you found an infected file from the PC. It just knows the file's gone. So it's like, wait, what happened? Where's my file? And then those last change date also can impact incremental saves. So there's really a lot of things that we don't like about the Windows, using a Windows antivirus to scan the platform. Use the server, scan the server with the tools that were intended for that platform. So keep it local. All right. I'm actually going to throw out a poll here because when I get started on this, I get really excited and I forget what I'm supposed to do. I want to know if you guys are actually scanning your system for malware. And if you are scanning your IBMI for Windows, are you scanning Linux servers? Are you scanning IBMI servers? Or are you not scanning at all? So really want to kind of get an idea if this is something that's even on your radar. If you've got IBMI systems, if you've got Linux systems, you need to make sure you're scanning those servers as well. Anything that's able to actually host a file and you're moving files on and off the system, need to be starting to think about that. All right, so got some responses there if anybody else wants to chime in. You know, it's really something that we don't think about so much. You know, have we actually, you know, Windows is a no-brainer. Everybody scans Windows. If you're not scanning Windows, you probably have a PC that's quite a train wreck. But Linux, AIX, IBMI. So really just kind of get an idea there. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and close the poll. Looks like we've got some of you guys have done that. So it looks like 45% say yes, they're scanning from Windows, 45% say yes, IBMI, 9% are no, and nobody with Linux on this call, so that's okay too. Not scanning, I would definitely, let's have a conversation. Scanning Windows but not IBMI, definitely need to have some conversations there. All right, so hopefully you guys kind of get the emphasis here. Let's look at the other software that you can actually use to get some control of this as well. And this is going to be exit points. So exit programs allow you to control access to the system from those PC interfaces. And so really using those to leverage who's able to even connect is a critical component. So there's many layers of control you can put in place to minimize the exposure, because we're going to have to give some users access to the system. Otherwise, the system's, again, going back to unplugged from the network, it's not very useful. So granting access, but making sure that that access has been granted with the intent of least privilege. So with exit programs, the idea here is that you want to create an exit program with rules to restrict who can access the system through those map drives and that file server. Not every user in your environment needs to have access to the map drives and use the file server, especially not RF devices on a warehouse floor. Do they need to have access to map drives? Probably not. So making sure only appropriate profiles are going to be able to use that connection. Again, FTP. Who should have access to use FTP and send files to the IBMI? Probably not most of your users. So ensuring that that exit program is configured to restrict that access. You can also use and create exit program rules to control the user's ability to rename and delete files through those map drives. Again, this is going to do a lot towards minimizing the damage from a ransomware attack, for example, where what happens is the user with the PC with the map drive and the ransomware running on it is going through on that IBMI, and in that IFS, it's taking that file, it's encrypting it and leaving a copy of the file with that ransomware extension on it, and it deletes the original. So if the user can't rename a file, they're not going to be able to do that encryption process. If they can't delete the file, they're not going to be able to get rid of the original. So your recovery is going to be a lot easier and the damage is going to be a lot less. So critical to make sure that even if that all object user, those exit program rules can enforce that, and an all object user can't delete a stream file through a map drive. Critical control that you can add there. Create exit program rules to control the user's ability to upload and replace files through FTP. So again, can they upload files? Can they do a put and replace existing files on the system? Making sure that, again, we're not allowing someone to overlay files and damage files or put something on the system that is inappropriate. Of course, those all object users, as I said, exit programs can stop them too. So while we may not be able to get rid of all of our all object user profiles, we can certainly restrict their ability to impact the system through the exit points that can be damaging in the attack, in a malware attack. So all object, fine. Sandy still has all object authority, but it's only going to be effective when she's on the green screen. And she has minimal access on the green screen. We can leave it there. But with my exit programs, I'm not going to allow her to delete stream files. I'm not going to allow her to rename files. I'm not going to allow her to even use FTP. So it goes a long way for getting that perimeter control around the system. Think of it as your firewall for the IBMI, where you can actually control access. You need to make sure when you're leveraging those exit programs that you're actually reviewing the logs for suspicious or unusual activity. Having it block is great. And the fact that nothing happened, it was blocked, is absolutely critical. But you also need to know that it got blocked, because you need to know that someone's trying to attack your system. So without having those exit programs giving you that visibility to those connections and that activity, you're not going to be able to know that somebody's trying to attack the server. Your programs are working, but you need to know that somebody's trying and attacking it. So Exit Point Manager is going to give you that visibility and that control. You know, I actually like to share a story. One of my colleagues worked with somebody recently who worked with our Exit Point Manager, and in the middle of their proof of concept of the software, they discovered overnight almost 800 rejected FTP attempts onto their server. And obviously the connection wasn't made, but for them it was alarming because the IP address that the attack was coming from was not from in their network. It was an external IP address. They didn't think their IBMI was visible outside of their network. So that showed them a hole in their strategy and was alarming. They were going to fix that. But then the second piece of it was that the profiles itself that were being used to try to connect to the system were not even IBM profiles. They had root, admin, administrator, anonymous, user 123, all of these non-IBMI profiles. So what it told us is that whoever was trying to connect to the server did not even know they were connecting to an IBMI, but they knew it was a server and they really wanted to get on. And so those connection attempts would not have actually even been known to them if they hadn't had an exit program logging the activity. Because IBM doesn't know who admin is or root is, so it's not even going to log anything anywhere on the system that says root tried to sign on and couldn't, because the profile doesn't even exist. IBM doesn't know to even tell you about it. So it's really critical to have the visibility to who's trying to attack your system as much as being able to prevent someone from attacking your system. All right, so obviously there's a lot of things to think about. Really, I like to go back to the layers, and it's all about having layers and layers of control, making sure that every possible point that you can add restrictions are there, taking away excess authorities from your users. I can't emphasize enough, it's not a matter of if you're going to end up with an attack, whether it's big or small, it's a matter of when it's going to happen. So be prepared for it. Make sure you're doing everything you can up front to minimize that damage, and make sure that you're able to deal with those threats head on before they become a problem. All right, if anybody has any questions, you're welcome to throw those out here into the questions panel. Again, we are recording this, so you will be able to get the link afterwards. Real quick, what I actually want to shoot out one last poll for everybody is if you're actually interested in looking at PowerTech Antivirus and adding that layer of control to your system. If you're not sure, let me know. We can certainly have another conversation to see if it's something that is going to help you guys. And it's all about making sure that you've put those layers of control in place. So, always happy to jump on with someone, answer questions, talk about your environment a little bit. Maybe you aren't aware of what is exposed, and if you have any exposures, to really kind of get you around to whether or not you should be worried. And I'll just give you a little clue here. You should be worried. It's unfortunate. This is what's going to happen if you are in fact already been attacked. So, all right, I have somebody asking if they already have. Yes, so someone's asking, it's like, as I asked if you would be interested in a free trial, and we've got some existing customers on the call. Thank you very much there, Rob, for pointing that out. So I should have that option on there that says I'm already scanning. So definitely some things. There's always options if you already have PowerTech antivirus. Let's make sure that it's actually configured correctly. We can always do a health check on it as well, Rob. So if you want to do a quick review, make sure that everything is set up. Ideally, be happy to do that with you as well. So, all right. So let's see. I'm going to close that poll there. If anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out. I'm going to go ahead and end the presentation here because it doesn't look like we have any more questions, and we're going to give you back a few minutes of your day. Really appreciate you joining us today, and I hope that it was helpful, give you some food for thought. Not trying to, I should say, I'm not trying to scare you, but you need to be concerned about it. So it's really about, once you're aware of what's going on and you actually step back and look at and evaluate your situation, you've taken a good positive first step. So reach out. You can email info@helpsystems.com or shoot a question back over here into the chat panel there, the questions panel. I'm happy to answer that for you. Otherwise, I wish you well, and good scanning, good security, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.